My name is Sophie Hewitt. I'm a Law and Asia Pacific Studies student at the ANU, and I'm joined today by Jennifer Robinson, an ANU alumna and international human rights barrister. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So while you were at ANU, you won the University Medal. You were recognised as a distinguished scholar in Asian studies. Subsequently, you were a Rhodes Scholar and have gone on to represent a number of high-profile human rights cases. Are you setting an unattainable bar for ANU law students?
No, I think it's actually an example of what's possible from the ANU. I was just explaining to the students that we met today that in my first few years at ANU Law School, my marks were sort of all over the place, and it wasn't until I went to Indonesia and spent time in West Papua that I suddenly understood what I could do with my law degree, and that changed everything for me. It changed my commitment to my studies. I understood the law in context, and it changed the way I approached my studies, and it changed the outcome of my studies, and the outcome is a university medal and scholarships. But I think it's important that this is attainable from the ANU. I was only here 13 years ago. And I want students to know that and to understand that about the opportunity that this university is.
You mentioned there about your experience in Indonesia. So that was in 2002. You spent a year studying there in West Papua. Mm-hmm. I too studied in Indonesia last year under the same ANU program, in fact. For me, I found it a really interesting opportunity to recalibrate my thinking about where I wanted my legal career to go. Was that the same kind of life-changing experience that you had?
My year in Asia during my Asian Studies degree was life-changing on so many fronts. The opportunity to immerse myself in Indonesian culture, my language skills went through the roof, I guess. I started dreaming in Indonesian. The Indonesian embassy was going to hire me in London. I mean, it was such a remarkable experience to have that opportunity to live there, to study with Indonesian students. It really enriched my understanding of Australia, of myself, and of what I wanted to do. Not just because of the opportunity of being exposed to what happened in West Papua, but also I think the broader international perspective and understanding how my language and legal skills could be used as a positive force for change. So through that time in West Papua, I really understood what we could achieve as lawyers for clients in marginalised communities. And that was such a motivator for me. In particular, the fact that West Papua was so unknown in terms of academically, politically, about the history of the self-determination movement and why there had been ongoing conflict, why it's occupied by the Indonesian military. For me, getting involved in that movement, I saw that I had a unique experience, and I felt a really strong obligation and responsibility to do something worthwhile with my law career, to create a platform to talk about West Papua. And I have done that and continue to do that in my work.
So you mentioned there that you started your human rights advocacy with the West Papuan self-determination movement. Mm-hmm. You've then now moved into one of your most well-known roles, representing Julian Assange. It seems that your advocacy has evolved from freedom of state to freedom of the press. How do you think that particular evolution came about for you?
Those two cases aren't unrelated, in the sense that both the Indigenous West Papuan community and Benny Wenda, the leader of the Indigenous community who I work with, who I represent and who I saw as a political prisoner in Indonesia as a student here at the ANU, or Julian Assange, these are both brave people who are taking on powerful interests. So there is a commonality. But what really appealed to me about what WikiLeaks was doing was the fact that WikiLeaks was publishing this material that was previously kept secret, which breaks down government control of narrative. If we look at West Papua, Indonesia doesn't allow the foreign press in. NGOs aren't allowed in. There's so little reporting coming out of that area. Certainly when I was there, living there, seeing with my own eyes what was happening there, seeing these horrendous human rights abuse, seeing the repression and oppression of the Indigenous community, but none of that was getting out because people weren't allowed in. I happened to have an Indonesian exchange student visa which allowed me to see that. I saw a case where American diplomats were trying to cover up what had happened at an American gold mine. And so for me, the fact that WikiLeaks was publishing this material and making it harder to keep this kind of injustice secret, I really see the value in that. And I think that's why it's so important and why we must defend the principle of what Julian does, and with WikiLeaks.
The International Bar Association recently released its report into sexual harassment and bullying in the legal profession. Do you find it bizarre as an advocate of human rights to also be facing human rights issues within your own profession?
It's a real shame, the level of sexual harassment and abuse within the legal profession, and I'm really pleased that that has now become a subject of further inquiry and further discussion. I think many women in the law have suffered it. I certainly have suffered it in my own career, and it's unacceptable. And it is another way in which women are told that we don't belong in the profession and that it's not safe for us. So I think the Me Too movement is incredibly important in speaking out about this stuff. So I think there was a feeling, and certainly when I had the experience, that you shouldn't talk about it because it would affect your career. And I'm really glad that that's starting to break down, and I think it's important that those of us who are now in positions of power, as I think I am relative to what I was when I was first starting out, that we talk about this and ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Over the years, you've taken on a number of high-profile cases. Being in the spotlight allows you possibly to be a greater public advocate, but I can imagine it would inevitably take a toll on you as well. How do you manage those public and private pressures?
Well, I think it's important as a human rights advocate to use the public platform that you have to advocate in the best interests of your client. The publicity that is associated with some of my cases has enabled me to speak about other lesser known causes. Certainly, journalists commented to me for many years following me on Twitter that they hadn't realised anything about West Papua, but because they followed me because of WikiLeaks, they now know a lot more about it. And I think that, there is a double-edged sword with publicity in the sense that it can be very stressful and it is very high-pressured. But utilised well, it is incredibly important for clients and for causes that we take the opportunities that we have to be able to put a spotlight on their issue. And I think storytelling through the media is an incredibly powerful tool in engaging people's empathy on a particular issue. And that's what we need to create change.
I read somewhere that if you weren't a lawyer, you would consider being a documentary filmmaker
That's
or
right.
investigative journalist. Is that because of the same reasons of the power of storytelling?
Definitely. I love storytelling. I believe in the power of storytelling, as I said, because it's an entry to empathy. I think told well, telling a client's story well, or a cause's story well, engages people in that issue and encourages them to take action to change it. And I often think, where do you have most impact? Is it in filing a legal case or defending a particular client? Or is it in exposing what's happening about a particular issue? And that's why I feel so passionately about defending journalists who do that important work, because it's so important for the human rights community that information comes out about corruption, human rights abuse, war crimes. And that gives us the tools as lawyers to be able to litigate. But it's also the tool through which we can hold governments to account. And ultimately, when you're a human rights lawyer, that's what we're doing.
Now, before you go, I must ask, you're about to have lunch with Brian Schmidt. How does it feel to be in the elite club that's allowed to try his wine?
Well, Brian is such great fun. He comes to London for alumni events, and I think we are so lucky and fortunate as a university to have someone of his academic weight and reputation, but someone who is so engaging and fun and interesting and open to meeting with students, and I think is a great representative for this university. And I also don't mind a glass of red wine, so it's a happy combination.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a good lunch.
Thank you.